Hey all, here OS Reviews. It's been a while since we've taken a look at a smartwatch, so today we are checking out the AKUMAKA 209DK, also referred to as their Series 1. This is a budget smartwatch that sells for under 50 bucks and does feature a microphone and speaker, which you can use to make phone calls when you're connected to your phone using Bluetooth, which also enables smart assistant control, whether it's going to be Google Assistant, Alexa, or Siri, based on your smartphone, supporting both iOS and Android. However, the part that is perhaps the most interesting is actually the included watch strap, which they tout as being liquid silicone, and it's a magnetic buckle design. So instead of relying on a conventional strap, which requires a little bit more effort to thread through and then pull tight as well as remove, this one here uses magnets, making it easier to just pop in and still provide a pretty secure fit as well as then release. With that being said, aside from this magnetic strap, you also do get a more conventional buckle-based design as well that you can swap in and out based on your preferences. Like most of these more budget-oriented smartwatches, because the operating system isn't as advanced as Android Wear or the Apple Watch OS, as a result, it's able to last a little bit longer as well, similar to a smart band. This thing will get you around a week's usage before you have to recharge it again. Now, it comes in a few colors, including this black, as well as pink versions can be found. And if I'm going to be completely honest, the design does seem a little inspired by the more expensive Apple Watch. Even the Apple Watch Ultra has a completely flat screen with a little bit of a raised profile on the side and kind of a digital crown, but this doesn't actually work when you're rotating it. It really is just a simple key that you can press to turn the watch on and off, which does have a metal trim, by the way, although the back here is constructed out of polycarbonate plastic. We have sensors including heart rate, SpO2 for blood oxygen, and also the charging contacts as well. So pretty clean. There's also going to be the small speaker there when you're using it for making phone calls. Now, touching on that flat display for another moment, I do have to point out this is an IPS LCD screen, which is pretty typical for a budget watch. It's quite bright and offers nice viewing angles, although it's not quite as contrasty, nor does it have a always-on mode. If they had used OLED, it looks quite clean from a design perspective, but on a watch, having a little bit of a curved edge actually makes swipes and interactions feel a little bit more premium, in my opinion, since the system does rely on quite a few gestures for getting around. Versus a flat screen, you tend to get a little bit more of an abrupt transition when you're hitting on the edges of the panel. So I personally prefer 2.5D if I had a choice on smartwatches, but nonetheless, it does look, again, quite good for the price point. And the screen, by the way, measures 1.85 inches diagonally, so it's relatively large as well. UI is quite simple on here, in fact, similar to other lower-cost smartwatches we've seen in the past. You can swipe over on the left to bring up a card of previously used applications, and they will dynamically change based on what you've been most recently using. So you can also take a look at your weather status, and then pulling down gives us a quick shortcuts for screen brightness. It doesn't have a ambient light sensor to change it automatically, but you can manually slide this up and down, a flashlight mode that turns the entire screen white, as well as a water eject mode, very similar to Apple Watches. It will vibrate and also make that sound for the speakers in case you're wearing the watch in the shower. This should then push out any residual water from the speakers. Though it's rated at IP68 rather than 5 ATM, so you shouldn't really go diving with it. Otherwise, we can swipe up to access the full list of applications, and for the most part, scrolling actually doesn't feel too sluggish, surprisingly, in terms of frame rates. You can also swipe over to the right to go into some quick cards or widgets that show you your daily status in terms of steps, calories that you've taken, and a more granular view as well in terms of how you compare with the last week. The next panel over shows you your sleep status, which will automatically clear the status once it reaches PM after 5 o'clock. So this is why the data isn't showing here, because we are now in the evening time, but we can still see the sleep data from the previous night on the companion app, which we'll take a look at in a moment. Further swipe here takes us into our heart rate, which you can track continuously during the day to give you a monitor of your resting heart rate as well as your averages. Then we can take a look at blood oxygen. This is a measurement which, like other smartwatches though, does require you to be still. Otherwise, another panel over can control music being played on your phone when you're paired by Bluetooth, and also a weather widget here that can show you the forecast, highs and lows. It doesn't actually loop all the way around, but rather you do have to go back into the main screen if you want to then take a look at some of the other panels. But overall, intuitive enough. And one thing that you can also customize here would be the style of how the icons are displayed on the full menu. So we have another method here, which is clearly inspired by Apple Watches with all of these bubbles that pop along. But there's also going to be another kind of tile-based system if you prefer, and then also the final kind of list system that we saw there from before. A few extra functions that you can trigger on the watch include initiating a sports session, and it will be tracking your heart rate, calories burned continuously during that session. You can also start this from the phone and use your phone's built-in GPS to track your route if you're running outdoors, for example, since the watch here unfortunately doesn't have built-in GPS of its own. Otherwise, there are plenty of sports, over 100 in total, more closely tracking your heart rate as well as steps, calories, distance during the session. So you are able to add alarms directly on the watch, which is quite convenient, and it will vibrate to alert you. You can also go into kind of a relax mode, similar to other smartwatches. You'll be able to breathe in and out with the animated circle to kind of relax. Any notifications that you want to pass through from your smartphone will also be shown over here, although you aren't able to reply to messages, at least at the moment. With that being said, two additions which are really nice to see include an SOS mode. You are able to program a contact, whether that's going to be a family member or even 911, the police, and whenever you tap on the SOS button, it will automatically dial that as long as you are connected to your phone, again using Bluetooth. There's also the aforementioned voice assistant, which will trigger the default assistant on your phone. Finally, down here, there's a toolbox that gives you a few extra utility functions, including a stopwatch, basic timer, as well as ability for you to find your phone. The phone will start to vibrate as long as it's paired, and also a basic calculator as well, which is kind of a throwback to the days of the Casio calculator watches, and actually quite convenient if you want to just tap something out very quickly and perform some simple arithmetic there. Now, long holding for a few extra seconds also allows you to change the watch face. With that being said, you can only push over one of your own watch faces at a time, since the memory on here is a little bit limited. The remaining 6 slots are baked in by default and unfortunately can't be swapped out, but they are reasonably attractive, giving you a digital watch face. Some of these can show a little bit more status info at a glance, although you aren't able to quite customize individual sections of a watch dial like on the real Apple Watch. But again, the screen is sharp enough that content in general still looks quite attractive on here, and not bad at all. One other comment about the magnetic strap is, in my testing, I found it to be fairly comfortable. However, the grooves, as part of the magnets here, do catch a little bit of dust and lint. Thankfully, the silicone is, again, waterproof, so it is easy to just clean off, but it's perhaps not quite as maintenance-free as on a flat type of strap. The app DK Fit, I believe, is a generic one that also works with other lower cost smartwatches we've seen in the past, but at the very least it's quite quick to connect to the phone as long as Bluetooth and location services are turned on, and you're able to very quickly see steps that you've taken, as long as change your goal in terms of how many steps you want to reach. It can also track durations during the day when you were a little bit more active automatically for you to gauge back and forth, as well as trace back on the previous history. It can collect up to a week's worth of data before the memory runs out, so as long as you sync it before the battery runs dry, you should be good. In terms of accuracy for step count, it does seem to be reasonably good, comparing it with some of the Apple as well as Amazfit alternatives. It seemed to be within a 5% or so margin of error. Even after I was kind of shaking the watch, it didn't really count any accidental steps. Similarly, the heart rate monitor also is quite good. This is an area where I would say even lower cost smartwatches honestly have improved over the past few years. Note here is if you do turn off the continuous heart rate monitoring, which will take a measurement every, let's say, 30 seconds to a minute, you can prolong the battery life from 7 days up to 2 weeks. You can also take a look at your sleep tracking data down below here, which in terms of accuracy is not quite as strong as on some of the more premium smartwatches, and that's been an area of difficulty for lower cost watches for a while now, and that is if you are taking a nap during the day, well, it doesn't really track that. You do have to be sleeping at kind of the conventional time at night, so it's not bad, but this is an area where the algorithms can definitely improve on for these lower cost watches. And then down below here, you can go into sports activities, initiating the geotagging from your phone, as well as taking a look at historical records. Then the device tab allows us to control what types of notifications we want to pass through, whether you want the heart rate tracking to be always turned on or off, and also dials that you can change. And surprisingly, it has a pretty robust selection of different watch faces, which are all reasonably attractive. although I will say that the process of syncing over a watch dial can be a touch on the more sluggish side, so it takes up to 30 seconds to completely change that one customizable slot. Regardless, a pretty attractive selection of dials, again, that you can pick between. Here's another example that is a little bit more analog and maybe classy looking for business purposes. And a final peek at the technical specs, it is using a Realtek-based processor with Bluetooth 5.2. With that being said, one mode here that is interestingly not perhaps the most accurate is it supports quote-unquote games. I would expect that to be really simple, maybe tap and go style like Flappy Bird, but on this current firmware at least, I don't actually see that functionality on the watch. Additionally, keep in mind that the current list doesn't support blood pressure monitoring, although that's not going to be the most accurate thing anyways. On most smartwatches, they're just using the heart rate monitor to approximate your blood pressure using a preset algorithm. So that's more or less it as far as our hands-on look at this 209DK smartwatch. Kind of shows what you can expect for a low-cost budget watch here in 2023, which is surprisingly not shabby if all you need is simple step tracking as well as basic heart rate monitoring, not to mention the ability to answer phone calls and use the assistant, and that kind of interesting magnetic strap are relatively unique at this price. You can check out more details if interested in the links down below, but for now that's been our video. Thanks for watching here at OS Reviews.